Thank you very much, Olivier, and good afternoon. I'm Robert Pinter, Market Development Manager at International Copper Association Europe, and welcome everyone at today's webinar, which is the 12th edition of the Zero Emission Buildings Academy. As said, we organized this together in partnership with BPIE and ECTP, and the aim of this academy is to share information and knowledge related to decarbonization of buildings and promote transition to zero-emission building stock. The newly adopted Energy Performance of Building Directive sets a clear goal for new buildings and a kind of final goal for renovation. And this is the zero-emission building. And this is a type of building with a very low energy need. And this very low energy is to be supplied 100% by renewable energy, preferable to be generated on-site or nearby the buildings. We have a new Article 10 on solar energy in buildings. And this article aims to optimize solar energy generation and defines a kind of pathway requiring member states to progressively utilize energy coming from the sun on different types of buildings by different timing. You know, heat, our today's subject, represents half of the EU energy consumption. And in case of residential buildings, it's even higher. 80% of energy consumed in our homes goes to space or water heating. And here, solar thermal collectors, our today's subjects, come into the picture because they can efficiently generate directly heat, which, coupled with energy storage or heat tanks, storage tanks, can be used in our homes for hot water or space heating, but they are also important in decarbonization of district heating networks and low-temperature industrial heat. And that's why we are here today to deep dive into heat in the context of the Epbd and the solar mandate. Having said that, let me introduce our today's speakers. First, Anette Persson, Policy Officer, Directorate General for Energy at European Commission, will set the scene on solar mandate in Epbd, and it will be followed by Valérie Séjourné, Managing Director of Solar Heat Europe, the Solar Thermal Industry Association in Europe. After the presentation, as said, we will launch the Q&A session, which will be joined by three solar thermal professionals, Laetitia Brottier, Pedro Diaz, and Oleguer Fuertes, to answer your questions. Let me remind you once again to add your questions in the Q&A session. So, with that, thank you for your attention, and let me pass the floor to Anette on solar mandate and Epbd. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Robert, for this introduction and for inviting me to this webinar, and good afternoon to everyone. So I would like to give you a brief background to the Epbd and the solar mandate. So next slide, please. And just also to say a few words on the state of play of solar energy in buildings today. Of course, this has really been a rapid uptake recent years, especially in the residential sector. And we have seen the declining costs for solar installations and also the availability of support schemes in most member states. And of course, during the energy crisis, this has shown to be a measure that can protect consumers from the volatility in electricity and gas prices. But then, of course, there are also barriers that would need to be addressed. We see today in many member states a delay in grid connections, and this is something which is being addressed by the European Commission in the Grid Action Plan. And we can also see the importance to have a sufficient number of installers and other persons working in the sector. So of course, the skills partnerships are really important. And last but not least, the European manufacturers, especially for PV, are under pressure, and the EU Solar Alliance was launched earlier this year. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is, as you are all probably well aware, a part of the Fit for 55 package, and it has really close connections with the other directives. And if we talk about solar, not least the Renewable Energy Directive is really a cornerstone in setting the targets, the mandatory targets overall, and also the indicative targets for the share of renewables in the built environment, and also, of course, the permitting processes and the more facilitated permitting processes also. And next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background to the solar mandate in the Epbd, because as you might be aware, the article on solar energy in buildings was not part of the initial recast Epbd proposal, but it came a little bit later, half a year later, with the Repower EU and the EU Solar Energy Strategy. So the background is of course, the need to rapidly reduce the dependence on fossil fuels and of Russian gas in particular. And thanks to the Repower EU and also the additional funds that were made available, we have seen 56 gigawatts of new solar energy capacity installed in 2023. And together with the Repower EU plan, there was the EU Solar Energy Strategy, which contained different parts. And one part was the European Solar Rooftops Initiative, which then also became the amendment to the Epbd. The other parts were more related to skills and industry aspects, as I mentioned earlier, and also, of course, to permitting. So for the EU Solar Energy Strategy, the target is 700 gigawatt in 2030, and today we see 260 gigawatt installed capacity. And there's also a global momentum when it comes to the use of solar, when with the pledge to triple the world's installed renewable energy generation capacity from COP28. So next slide, please. And today we will talk mostly about heat. And as also mentioned by Robert, heat is a very big part of the energy use in buildings, residential, but also non-residential buildings. And of course, solar thermal plays a key role here. And with the EU Solar Energy Strategy, the aim is to make all new buildings solar ready, but also to use the existing structures, because all the roofs that we have today that are possible to equip with solar installations, it's really a resource that can be used without using new land for renewable energy production, but actually to use existing already built structures. And also to empower consumers and to allow them to also share energy between them, also in connection to the new provisions in the Electricity Market Directive, and also participate in energy communities. And a special focus will need to be put to ensure that vulnerable households also take part in this transition. So next slide, please. So then finally, this proposal was made with Repower EU to add this amendment to the recast Epbd, and both co-legislators, the Council and the Parliament, they agreed that it was a good idea to add this. So in the negotiations, this was discussed together with all the other articles, and this is the end result of the negotiations, that the new buildings shall be designed to optimize solar energy generation potential, and specifically that there shall be a deployment of suitable solar energy installations on new buildings, earlier for new public and non-residential buildings, and later for new residential buildings and for new roofed car parks. And then when it comes to existing buildings, there are requirements to install suitable solar installations, taking into account criteria for economic, technical, and functional feasibility on public buildings, starting with the smaller public buildings, and this could be schools, hospitals, administrative offices, etc. Starting with the larger, and then gradually cover also the smaller one down to 250 square meter. And for existing non-residential buildings, that could be shops, offices that are larger than 500 square meters, they would need to be equipped with suitable solar installations, either when they undergo a major renovation or when some other works are being done to this specific building, which would require an administrative permit. This could, for instance, be works on the roof or on the facade, and this will be a little bit different from country to country, exactly in which cases this requirement linked to the administrative permits apply. Next slide, please. And of course, this is a zero emission building webinar. And of course, I also have to point to the other relevant articles in the Epbd, which are also very important for the deployment of solar energy. So zero emission buildings, of course, but also the national building renovation plans, where member states will have to outline their policies to increase renewable energy, and in particular solar energy, and also the gradual phase out of fossil fuels in buildings, with first starting with a ban on financial incentives for fossil fuels, and then also for member states to outline in the national building renovation plans their policies with a view to a phase out of fossil fuels in the existing building stock. And also, Robert mentioned briefly the possibilities of energy storage. This is something which is also part of the article on technical building systems, that member states shall promote energy storage, because of course this is really important also with the current grid bottlenecks that we see. And I don't know if you can see it on the slide. I can't see it on mine, but there's also one point on one-stop shops. That's an important source of information for households, for SMEs, and for others on what are the technical requirements, what would be the support, the possibilities for financial support, etc. So also information and awareness measures. Next slide, please. And right now we are preparing guidance documents for member states to clarify those questions that arise during this implementation period. And just to highlight a few initial considerations, and one is, of course, that the solar energy article is technology neutral. It covers solar PV and solar thermal. And also, even though the starting point was the solar rooftop initiative, we do not see any reason to limit it to rooftops, but as long as it has a connection to the building and using the existing or newly constructed structure, we think that this complies with this article. So next slide, please. And of course, it's really important also to have a holistic view and look at the possibilities of integration to increase the possibilities of self-consumption. So of course, to integrate, for instance, solar thermal with storage, but also solar thermal with heat pumps, PV with heat pumps, PV with storage, and also the EV recharging. So also in addressing the grid challenge, it's really important to see how can we make the most use of the self-consumption within the building. And then there's also a lot of things going on when it comes to the development of new and innovative solutions with different kinds of combinations between solar PV, solar thermal, and also how you can best combine it with green roofs, which can be really important in city centers to also have these green roofs, and the building integrated PVs, where you would see solar as part of the construction element and not only as an add-on. So there's a lot of interesting development going on. And next slide, please. So I mentioned that we are preparing the guidance right now. So just for a few dates, the publication in the official journal took place on the 8th of May, and the directive entered into force on the 28th of May, and member states now have 2 years for the implementation. And we are currently in the process of preparing this guidance, and also aim at sharing best practices for member states to learn from each other. And this was all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anette. And the second presentation on really deep dive on solar thermal technology. Valerie, please, the floor is yours.
Second, I'm still on the other slide. 1 second. Excuse me, I'm bugging. Oops.
Maybe I will use this time to remind you on a Q&A button where you can add your questions, and also the possibility to upvote the questions already there, and we will answer in the order or the ranked order based on number of upvotes for the questions. Thank you.
Should work. Yes. Good. So
Yes, it will.
Perfect. So very happy to be with you, and thank you very much for the invitation to the partners of the Zero Emissions Building Academy. I'm Valérie Séjourné, Managing Director of Solar Heat Europe. So Solar Heat Europe is really the voice of the solar thermal industry here in Brussels. We have members in representing the full value chain, from national associations, suppliers and manufacturers of solar thermal, collectors, but also project developers, engineering companies, research institutes, and certification bodies. So the full value chain of the solar thermal is in the scope of our association. As we heard it already on a couple of occasions, it is half of our energy needs, and we want to really have a good visibility of that important energy that we all need to really enjoy hot bath heating in home and our health and hygiene overall. So it's really important, and at EU level, only 25% of that heat needs is supplied by renewable energy for the moment, and it's essentially biomass for the moment, which is a big percentage behind this 25%. When we look at the buildings, which is 1/3 of the consumption of energy compared to industry and transport, 80% of the energy needs in buildings account for heat. It's about 15% for hot water, 65% for heating. So a substantial share of our energy needs in building goes for heating. So the optimal direct renewable heat supplies, which can meet that important need, should be promoted. So what is solar thermal? There are different types of collectors. Obviously, the ones which apply more for buildings are the ones which you see on the left part of the screen. We have flat plate collectors, high vacuum flat plates, evacuated tube. There is also the hybrid technology doing both photovoltaic and solar thermal. Though those can go up to 180 degrees, which is sufficient for buildings need. When we go to other applications in industry, for example, we also have concentrated technologies, which you see on the right part of the slide. Important to note is that there is a certification standard here in Europe called the Solar Key Mark, and quasi all the collectors which you will find on the market in Europe would be compliant with this Solar Key Mark, so that in terms of performance and quality assurance for the user is really a good quality seal that they can rely on. So that's good. So the different market segments for solar heat are for buildings, residential and tertiary commercial buildings, and also a large-scale application, district heating and industry, we are going to focus today on building, but interestingly, indeed, district heating can definitely be supplied through solar heat as well. And in terms of optimized way to decarbonize building, that there is really a nice potential. But we won't zoom on that today. That maybe could be another topic for a next edition of the webinars. So with regard to the market of solar thermal, we have 10 million rooftops already equipped with solar heat and 40.5 gigawatt thermal, so that's 58 million square meters. Unlike what some of you may think, it's actually Germany, which is the biggest market in terms of installed capacity. You see the figure on the screen, followed by Greece, Italy, Spain, Austria. So in terms of volume, this is the situation so far. When you look on a per capita basis, you see that Cyprus and Greece, on the right part of the slide, would be the ones using most solar thermal on a per capita basis, followed by Austria, Germany, and Denmark. So I like to show these slides to also indicate that in the top 3 countries, we don't have just the most sunny part of Europe, but also Western Europe, Austria, Germany, Denmark, where solar thermal works and delivers. Of course, the other aspect of the chart shows that there is big potential for other countries, like, for example, France, but also Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, to grow their further penetration and use of solar heat. I'm going to share here a few pictures of solar heating installed. So I'm starting by Greece because we see it very predominantly, on the rooftop in Greece with the thermosiphon technology. Here on buildings and multi-family apartments. You see here, Annette was mentioning the inclusion on facade, and I'm glad to share this example of a house in Germany. Here it's the evacuated tube technology, sharing the rooftop with solar photovoltaic in the back and in the front solar heat. That's a leisure center rooftop in England. Here it's a house in Slovenia where you see the light part on the top is solar thermal and the rest of the roof is solar photovoltaic. I will come to that in a second, but interestingly, whilst our share on the roof is much smaller, the energy output is exactly the same. So you get the same energy produced from this lower surface of thermal compared to what we see on photovoltaic. Here, it's a beautiful example of facade integrated as really part of the design from an architectural point of view. So I personally love these examples where it's really nicely and aesthetically combining together to have the source of energy incorporated in the aesthetics and design of the building. That's an example from Switzerland. Another beautiful one is this Olympic swimming pool club, which was inaugurated with its solar rooftop of PVT, so the hybrid technology, in Barcelona last year. And another nice example in Spain with PVT installation on a hotel. So what we like to say is that, of course, the principles to reach a climate objective and net zero by 2050 is, of course, the principles of the energy which is not consumed is the best one. So energy saving, energy efficiency is the first principle. We see solar thermal as a kind of no-brainer, no-regret installation. It includes thermal energy storage. And then the beauty of it is that it can be combined with any other heat supply. Of course, fossil fuel, but we want to progressively transition away from those and other renewable heat supplies like geothermal, biomass, of course, waste heat, biogas, district heating, and of course, heat pump supplied by clean energy supplies like PV or others. So that's the kind of summary overview of what we want to say, the hybridization potential of solar thermal. We discussed already a bit about the regulatory framework through the presentation from Annette, so I won't go into the details, but obviously the Energy Efficiency Directive, Renewable Energy Directive, Epbd, the focus of today, are clear opportunities for solar thermal to really continue its growth path, as well as ETS. We also heard about the progressive, implementation of the Epbd and the solar mandate on rooftops. So that's another way to explain the potential and by when all these solar installations should be installed. So solar thermal is definitely keen to contribute and play its fair share on this further penetration on the rooftop or on the facades of buildings. What we want to share as key messages for the guidance, which is under preparation for the Commission and for the member states when they will be finalizing theirs, is that the solar mandate is definitely a mandate, as Anette said, both for photovoltaics and for solar thermal and PVT. We are really keen to have fair national frameworks used and promoted when drafting the guidance at local level. What we are really advocating for is that the energy produced per available area, more than the percentage of the area, should be promoted, because as we see on the graphic on the right, and as I said with the example of Slovenia a few pictures ago, we have a really important yield. So we can produce 3 times more in terms of the same surface on the rooftop. So this component of energy produced and not only rooftop area field is something that we are keen to insist on for the guidance on deployment of the mandate, and that the heat and or electricity generation should be clearly stipulated, so that this really mandate should be clearly promoting all technologies. The fact to have adequate consultations at local level with all stakeholders is something that we are also promoting, as well as flanking measures, incentives, and good monitoring of its implementation. This slide is to illustrate the fact that, of course, there is a lot of developments happening on the electrification. We see the obligation for electric vehicles and the stop of fossil fuel for cars by 2035, if I'm not mistaken. So this is going to be putting a lot of weight on the electrification agenda. Of course, other technologies like heat pump are having their action plan and are a clear way for moving away from the traditional fossil fuels. What we are promoting is that any solution like our solar thermal, which can provide this direct heat supply, hot water heating in a decentralized off-grid way, is a gain for the burden on the grid and should definitely be promoted. Solar thermal can deliver. We don't need to transit by electricity to produce the heat. We can provide it and supply it directly, store it in cost-efficient thermal energy storage. So all this is less pressure on the grid. It can also help heat pump function better by supplying the basic need and then making the heat pump even more efficient, last longer. So we are really advocating for a balanced approach, energy efficiency, insulation, direct renewable heat supplies, and the other electrification components to make the whole energy transition a success. So in conclusion, solar thermal is definitely a nice sector. I should not forget to say, important that the industry that we represent is actually very proud to be based in Europe, manufacturing in Europe, and supplying the demand. Many of our members are tripling their production line as we speak, hoping to really be able to cope with this tripling of our market by 2030. So implementation of this current legislative package is going to be critical. We really are advocating for a fair treatment of all technologies, fair competition. Awareness is important. You know, when people think solar, they may not realize that there is also solar thermal and not just solar photovoltaic. So here the work of cities, for example, to really promote equally all the technologies through the one-stop shops is going to be very important. And we also want to have the good enabling conditions with the right financial incentive, the right skilled people to install different technologies and really make that transition a success with all renewable energy sources which are needed. So thank you very much and happy to have your questions.